Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the St. Gallen Wings of Excellence anniversary session. This will be a very special occasion as we celebrate the 30th edition of our global student essay competition. Since 1989, more than 25,000 student ideas from across cultures and disciplines have been submitted, making it the foremost student essay competition of its kind. The award has inspired students to pursue their ideas and believe in their power to make a difference. And tonight, you will be inspired again. The session will start with this year's finalists, who will present their take on the question, robots are coming for your job. How do you augment yourself to stay economically relevant? We will introduce the 3 awardees after their presentations. You will then get to know 3 stories about former student participants who, inspired by St. Gallen, have pursued their ideas to create long-lasting impact in their communities. We will then have the pleasure of welcoming Steve Forbes on stage to share his views on empowering young people. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the host of this session, 3-time award winner of the Wings of Excellence Award, Jason George.
It's an honor to be back here in St. Gallen. It's an honor to host the Wings of Excellence Award. I have to say the competition was a little less intense when I applied, so undergraduate students could apply, so that's one of the reasons why I was able to come through. I'm not sure if I would have made it past a pool that included these 5 people. So as the video mentioned, this is the 30th year that this has happened. Started in 1989, and this year we had a record number of student submissions. So 1,208 submissions representing 420 different universities, based in 80 different countries, and those students represented 111 different nationalities. And of those 1,208, the top 100 are here in this room, and the top 5 are here on this stage. So we're going to... We're going to hear each of these 5 present their ideas to us, and then we'll have our panel interact with these ideas. We're also going to do a little bit of voting, so this is something that's different. We're going to get a sense from the audience of who you believe had the most compelling pitch. So just to be clear, the award jury has actually already chosen the winners. The prizes are already here. It's based solely on the essay competition, but we want to give it a little bit of a chance for the audience here to react and respond to the students as they present. I want to introduce our panelists as well, who will be interacting with and questioning and challenging the student presentations. We have Stephan Chambers with the Marshall Institute for Philanthropy and Social Entrepreneurship at the London School of Economics, co-founder of the Skoll World Forum, and holds a few appointments at Oxford as well. We have Elena Kvochko, who is a CIO in the financial services industry based in New York, an expert in cybersecurity. Recently was nominated and awarded by CIO magazine, one of the top 100 CIOs. And also an interesting story is she was my fellow leader of tomorrow in 2009. We came on the plane together from Boston, where we were both studying at the time. And finally, last but not least, Thebe Ikalafeng, leading branding expert, extensive marketing experience, founded Brand Africa and public sector initiatives in Africa, known for his colorful comments that go along with his colorful outfits. We're actually just going to jump in and then get started. Let's hear the first presenter. We'll hear their introduction first.
My name is João, I'm from Brazil, and I study Public Administration and International Development at Harvard Kennedy School. One of the things I really like to do in my free time is to travel, especially hiking. I think it's a great way to experience different cultures and also to get in touch with nature. If artificial intelligence and robotics evolve in the way we're expecting them to do, they will disrupt society and have deep consequences for inequality. If that happens, we have to be ready for it.
How does a world of mass unemployment look like? This is a very challenging question because actually we never faced something similar to this in a global scale before. Actually, several times in history, we have feared that this would be the case in the next few years or decades. But history itself, so far, has proven us wrong. But what if this time it actually is different? What if the combination of artificial intelligence and robotics actually destroys more jobs than it creates? Or, even if it does create a row of new activities and jobs, what if the skills we currently have don't match the skills we need for these new professions? The standard approach to solve this challenge usually relies on education and retraining. Actually, in the morning, we heard that in basically every panel that we had in the symposium. However, I would like to remember that right now we are in Switzerland, we are in Europe, and I come from Brazil, which forces me to acknowledge that the developing world has had a really hard time when betting on education alone. Just to think about it, in the past few decades, we actually managed to put virtually every kid at school, and still learning outcomes have barely moved. And I'm talking about basic reading skills and basic math. So what I'm worried about is, what if this does not work? What if we cannot improve education and have trainings that are fast enough, as fast as technology evolves? Under that scenario, I believe we have to consider other tools. Today I have two proposals. First, I believe we have to seriously consider taxation on robots and machines that directly replace humans. I believe this makes sense if we accept that working is not just a source of income. Working actually provides meaning to human life to a great extent, and actually defines our role in society. It makes us useful, it makes us belong. If that is true, then it makes sense, makes economic sense, to incentivize industries to, when deciding between a human or a robot to perform a certain task or activity, to prefer a human, because there is an intrinsic value in human labor that is not there with robots. My second proposal is to lower labor barriers across countries. How can this help exactly? Basically, what we are experiencing right now is a huge amount of brain power in the Silicon Valley and elsewhere, trying really hard to replace humans in activities that we already perform. Think about autonomous vehicles. Why so many companies are going for this technology? Well, it's pretty simple. The human cost in these industries and in several others is a huge component of total cost. So if you get there, you're actually going to make a lot of money with this technology. But then we should also consider, is human labor really scarce? Actually, it is scarce in the developed world, and it is scarce artificially. It's scarce because we humans created institutions that stop people from moving across countries. It's not scarce in the world, not at all. So if we allow more people to migrate for working purposes to industrialized nations, we can make humans more competitive in these inevitable comparisons with machines. This would make humans the center of the productive system, and will also increase well-being for these people that do migrate in an unprecedented level. I'm not saying that these two ideas are easy or simple to implement or non-controversial, but I also believe that in unconventional times, we need unconventional ideas. Thank you.
Well, if I may, I will start first by saying thank you for something that's kind of interesting and provocative and compelling. Second, for commending you on having counterfactuals in there. I very much like the kind of what if. But I have a couple of quite specific questions. On the taxation proposal, what do you do about defining what a robot or a machine is? Do you go backwards and make this retrospective? Because there are lots of robots and machines doing all kinds of interesting things which we wouldn't tax today. And second, on the labor mobility thing, have you considered that now might not be a time in history when that would go down well?
Perfect, thank you. Actually, I welcome the questions because they are not super trivial proposals, and more time to explain is better. On the taxation, it's actually the most challenging thing about this proposal, in my view, is precisely defining the line. But one thing that I think it's very important to keep in mind is this taxation will cause distortions in the economic sense. We are actually changing the optimal way of production towards something that gives advantage to humans. So we will cause distortions, and if we don't get this line precisely well, we will cause trouble. The point is the counterfactual, right? If we don't do anything, we might be in a world that we've never experienced before of unprecedented unemployment. So what I'm provoking the audience and everyone to think about is the trade-off. How much efficiency are we willing to give up to preserve institutions and harmony in society? But I acknowledge that it's not hard to put a line, and we have to face this challenge. On labor mobility, I think maybe never was a good moment, and now is especially not a good moment. But I also believe that if this threat, this is all conditional on seeing in the data that we are actually experiencing a threat in terms of employment and human activity. So I'm thinking in a world in which, right now, as we said in the morning, we actually have record employment in most countries. So we're not really experiencing this problem yet. But I believe that the political scenario will change very dramatically if we actually start seeing raising unemployment everywhere because of machines and robots. And I think this change is what will make it politically feasible to implement the labor mobility idea.
Interesting answer.
Elena.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, I agree with you that in current society, a job for most people gives this sense of belonging, gives this sense of meaning in life. But you know, for instance, if you look at some of the research findings at, for instance, Stanford University, there's a new book called Dying for a Paycheck. And it argues that also jobs for most people are #1 source of stress and depression, you know. So I think a lot of companies are trying to solve that by giving unlimited work time or other sorts of flexibility to employees that they have more time to spend on their own or with families. Say if your proposals for whatever reason do not work out and we continue on this trend that we're currently witnessing, do you see any way for us to pivot it into a more positive trend, you know, maybe find a different meaning or a different occupation, or is pivoted in a more positive way that we might not currently see?
You mean concerning improving how we experience work?
Concerning the ratio of work that can be divided between humans and robots, and if more of that is done automatically.
I do believe, and that should be very clear, I do believe that retraining and education are a way to go. I'm just skeptical about the fact that we will be able to do this fast enough. Mm-hmm. So the reason behind especially the taxation idea is to slow things down so that institutions can catch up with technological speed. Because right now, human institutions evolve in a way slower path, right? Pace. On the working being unpleasant activity in many situations, I again provoke us to think about the counterfactual, right? We are not thinking about having a pleasant work or maybe unpleasant and stressful work. We are thinking about work and no work at all. So I do believe that we have a lot of improvements, we have a lot of progress to make in making work a more pleasant activity for most of humanity. But I also believe that if we have no jobs, we are worse off than we are today.
Thebe, do you have a final question for Joao?
I'm worried about him. First, obviously, we're worried about your tendency to start practicing the idea of exploitation and slavery, which you seem to be quite enamored with, bringing people from other countries for cheap labor. You know that's not a good idea, right? As Stephan has said, but we'll deal with it later. But I'm thinking, you're from Brazil.
Yes.
Now, your governments have been quite interesting the last couple of years, haven't they? Pretty much all your leaders you've either put in jail or you've just kicked them out of government. Don't you think robots actually will be perfect for Brazil? Because then you can spend all the time in nature that you absolutely love.
Well, I believe it's a very low bar to compare it with Brazilian politicians, but so robots could outperform. Yeah, that might be true. But jokes aside, I do believe we have, and that's a very important point actually, democracy has a reason to exist, and institutions have a reason to exist. My concern, my original concern, that brings me to all these ideas and trying to solve the problem, is precisely if our institutions fail to adapt fast enough. I think that we're not doing a great job in Brazil politics, but I do think as a world, we do have to find a way to make institutions, including politics, evolve in a pace that makes democracy stable and possible to remain existing.
And you seem to give the robots more credit. And these things are created by you human beings. So I think the big problem is not with the robots taking the jobs, isn't it? Isn't the problem with humans being lazy and spending all their time in nature?
I do believe that the robots are actually innovation in general. It's actually a super important activity, and it's basically the engine of growth in the past few decades in most developed countries. That's why I don't want to be seen as let's be a ludist movement in the 21st century and let's deny technological progress. That's why I'm saying taxation. I'm not saying let's close tech companies and stop doing anything that will be disruptive. We have to just make disruption happen in a way that is compatible with the world we live in. I just want to avoid too fast disruption, so to speak.
Great.
But I do believe we have to do something.
Thank you, Joao.
Thank you so much.
Much more to explore. Let's introduce our second presenter.
Hi, my name is Dominic Geisler, and I'm currently finishing my Master in Business Innovation at the University of St. Gallen. Besides studying, I love to be in open spaces, do all kinds of sports, or to be around the world, exploring new cultures and countries. I believe if we are aware of the possibilities of the ongoing technological development, we can take advantage of it and guide the society into a positive future.
During the last 2 days, we heard a lot of discussion about whether the positive or the negative consequences of machines replacing human workers will shape our society of tomorrow. I argue that if we set the right course today, the ongoing technological change can be steered towards a beneficial system for all people around the world. And my vision for this system is the leisure society. The leisure society is based on the assumption that an unconditional basic income will be unavoidable. But simply giving people the money to survive will not solve the entire problem. A challenge I keep thinking about is, wouldn't an unconditional basic income diminish an individual's feeling of worthiness? So key questions remain, like, how can people be motivated to not sit in front of a TV all day? How can people find meaning and fulfillment in their lives without having a permanent job? And how can they get the feeling of still being economically and socially relevant? Because if machines do all the work, humans will have time to pursue leisure activities which they enjoy and which make them happier in life. But as we all know, humans sometimes have to be motivated to get active, even for things they love and care about. So the main question is not how can we bring back jobs, but rather how can we incentivize people to do what they value most and to be rewarded for that? And the answer to that is gamification. The Leisure Society platform is a gamified digital platform on which people can earn points and rewards for activities they have done. They can climb up the leaderboard in their specific area of interest, and they can take part in a discussion as a thought leader about topics they're really passionate about. And by implementing game design elements, people will be driven by their intrinsic motivation to do what they value most and to be rewarded for that. I believe that in a world where people differentiate themselves by what they do instead of what they own, social value will be more important than economic value. And the Leisure Society platform will enable people to share what they do, to follow their passion, and to find their social and individual purpose in life. Thank you.
Thebe, let's start with you.
Dominic, good to see you again. 4 years ago, you were driving me. Today, you are trying to say, I need to pay you for doing nothing. What is about your idea, by the way? It sounds beautiful and all that, but I thought the salary and the bonuses are enough motivation or incentives for you to not wander around and start playing Pac-Man on your computer. So I don't understand why I need to incentivize you to do something else on a computer when I'm paying your salary.
I mean, it's based on the assumption that the unconditional basic income will be there. So
in other words, you're going to get paid anyway. So you may as well not focus on the job and find something you're interested in. So just quit the job and go do something that you're interested in.
So yeah, but this gives people the freedom to do what they really value. And because with an unconditional basic income, the people are almost the same, and people are driven to have a social recognition within the society. They want to have a specific role in society, and with this approach, they can do what they love and can be in their specific area of interest and be part of the discussion globally.
But why should it be at the expense of the company, Dominic? That's just my worry. My worry is you are saying, pay me a salary while experimenting all day, trying to find out what you like, and then when you find it, you leave me having added no value throughout the day.
But you mean no economic value?
Well, I mean, in the primary job that I'm paying you for to do, other than the one that you're playing on the games.
Yeah. I mean, there are probably people that will take advantage of that and play Pac-Man all day, but I believe that at some point they will get bored and they will think about their values and what is important for them, and they will get active. But with gamification, you can address these people before, and with these extrinsic motivators, they can be pulled towards the platform on which they can achieve their intrinsically motivated behaviors, reaching a social status, following a purpose in their life. And so I think there are these people, and the gamification, the platform, is wants to integrate all of them. Yeah.
Elena.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Procrastination is a problem anyhow, and there's already a number of different tools that are trying to solve that. But what I was wondering about, two questions. First, have you thought about the reward system for those kind of platforms? What would be the actual, you get the points, but then what? And the second point is, it seems like you're trying to solve a society-wide problem, or a company-wide or even a country-wide problem. Have you thought about potentially creating mechanisms for collaboration within a certain company or a government to incentivize people to get real rewards versus just points in a game?
Yeah, maybe I should elaborate more on the idea. So there are two sections. The first section is the leisure section, where the game design elements come into play, and where people get points, and the points sum up, and you climb up the leaderboard, and you get invited to the thought leader circle. And the second section is the challenges section, where companies, where individuals, where cities can launch challenges, where people have the possibility to create an additional income. So, for example, let's say St. Gallen wants to improve the air quality, and they want to quickly plant a lot of trees. So they launch a challenge in the challenge section, and people can like participate, plant trees, and they get an additional income.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. I very much appreciate your obvious commitment to kind of human flourishing. I mean, you clearly think about this because you think about the fate of the world, and I think that's great. There seemed to me to be a kind of contradiction, though, right at the heart of what you were saying, and it slipped out at one point. You mentioned the words intrinsic motivation, and you spent quite a lot of time talking about incentivization. Now, if I understand correctly, those two things are working in opposite directions. If people have intrinsic motivation, they don't need incentives. If they need incentives, they don't have intrinsic motivation. And I think that kind of distinction is a serious question at the heart of your proposition.
That's true. But there are different people. Some people are ambitious by themselves. They take part in the society. They do good activities. But some people, they have to be motivated by these extrinsic motivation factors, which gamification is. But that's like where, because gamification experts have to be included at designing.
I understand.
But the goal still is they should target intrinsically motivated behavior. So in the long term, the people that participate in the leisure society, they will be driven by these intrinsic motivational behaviors, like social status. Otherwise, it wouldn't be successful. But these extrinsic mechanisms are like a good approach to pull these people in and to wake this intrinsic motivation up.
So you've done a kind of market segmentation between people who are intrinsically motivated and people who aren't, which I suspect may be fantastically hard.
Yeah.
And my last observation is that solutions to big, intractable questions of human flourishing very rarely work when they're designed for people. They sometimes work when they're designed with people. So I guess the next step in this will be to find out how people really wish their incentives or their motivations to be developed. Yeah,
and therefore the whole platform should be designed bottom up. So it should be a big group of gamification experts, people of all social layers, to really address all the needs and all the fears of all different people, and to have really this successful platform in the long run. They really have to address all the different needs and to include and to have to make sure that they commit it and they accept the system. They have to be included in the creation of the whole platform.
Just a quick one. The one thing I was just thinking about your title, or rather about the branding, from a branding perspective. Leisure society is a bit of a problematic thing as well, because the whole idea of leisure means that I'm actually not productive, I'm not working, I'm relaxed.
But it's now, the perception of leisure now.
So you're going to redefine leisure?
Yes.
Love it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominic. So we move to our third finalist.
My name is Jonas Goldschmidt, and I'm a PhD student in complex systems in Potsdam, Germany, and Aberdeen, UK. I'm a co-founder of Stoke Brain and systems engineer there, and we work on accelerating non-invasive brain stimulation. Right now, I am on parental leave because I have a little baby girl who's 7 months old, and I am sleeping even less than I used to while I was studying. We need to talk about understanding artificial intelligence better so that our elites and politicians make the right decisions about moving our society forward.
Let us get one thing out of the way. People will lose jobs. Irrespective of technological considerations, our very economic system demands that we make more with less. 100 years ago, it was horses that were put out of work by cars because cars were better at, pulling things. Now it is us humans that will get automated away. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. The tasks that we're automating are repetitive, straining, and oftentimes dangerous. There are tasks like you driving a car where you don't actively think about which way to turn the wheel or which pedal to push. It is your subconscious mind that takes over and runs the show. I believe that technology can set us free to pursue those tasks that define and require what makes us human: active thinking, creativity, and compassion. What stops this from happening starts with our current political debate. Politicians still propose that education is the solution to mass unemployment. They want us to learn programming so that companies will hire us. I believe this is wrong. We don't need more programmers. Already in this field, you can see automation replace people, and trying to keep up with this is a lost cause. That does not mean that education is not a solution to our predicament. We simply currently fail badly at explaining to people how the world around us works. The wonders of our world are built upon the advances of logic, the scientific method, and high-performance data processing. The lack of understanding these things is what I call technological illiteracy. And it is this illiteracy that I believe stops us from having a mature discussion about where we want to take society. I thus have two propositions. One, we have to revamp our educational systems such that technological literacy is at the center stage of every subject area. Just as we 100 years ago made reading and writing a norm, technological literacy is a long-term goal that we have to start working on right now. Two, we have to provide people with respected and well-paid jobs. Work is how we derive purpose in this world and how we participate in society. This work can be, for example, taking care of the elderly or young children, or it can be an education and blue sky research. And these jobs will not be automated away because, for one, they lack a profit motive, and for two, they are what differentiates us from horses, and they are what makes us human. This is how we can stop society from buckling under the strain of, under the promise of supercharged automation. And this is how we can have all share in the fruit of our technological progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Giannis. I turn to our panel. The two propositions, how do you respond to that? Maybe we'll start with you, Elena.
Sure. I think you raised a number of great points and great ideas. My first question is, how would you say promoting technological literacy is different from education that you think government is not doing well enough these days? And then the second point is, how would you also account for the intent of automation, right? Because automation and artificial intelligence do not just emerge by itself, right? It's programmed, it's created by the humans themselves. So how do we make sure that the intent of this automation and everybody who creates those tools will actually serve us for the better?
So the first question. These things are very closely related, of course. It's more of a utopian idea of where we want to go. To me, this starts with not having politicians, let's say, go on public television and making fun of not being able to add numbers. That happens regularly for some reason in my country. So it is a respected thing to, know history or know languages, which is great. I mean, I like these things myself. But you shouldn't make fun of, not being technologically literate. So it starts with that. Make this, a thing that elites care about. The intent of automation. The intent of automation, to me, is heavily tied to our economic system. I mean, who profits from, doing automation? And how do you, implement, I forgot the word. How do you motivate people to, use automation? Mm-hmm. That's actually that's actually a question I don't have a solution to. Yeah. Because that requires, as I said, really thinking about where we want to take society and who we want to have automation serve. People, society, profit. Mm-hmm. Even though profit can drive improvement, it can also be an impediment to it.
Stephan?
Again, Thank you, and thank you for addressing things that really matter. I have a kind of question that seems a small question, but it's probably a big question. By virtue of what would a more technologically literate society be better at handling some of the questions that you started with? Unemployment.
When I hear people talk about artificial intelligence, a lot of emphasis is put on the intelligence part. I myself try to do research into what sentience means and how neural networks derive their computational power. And I realize, and that's what also the leading AI experts say, is that it can't do nearly as much as people imagine it will be able to do.
So I don't want to sound Thebe-like, but maybe it isn't really technological literacy that's needed. Maybe it's a bunch of much more old-fashioned kinds of literacy that have to do with politics and culture and economics and altruism and the framing of the possibilities that advanced technologies allow us to examine. I'm just very slightly skeptical that people being better grounded in technology will lead to better outcomes. Someone has said this morning, I can't unfortunately remember who it was, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, it's also absolutely clear that politics eats economics for breakfast. So knowing more isn't always the right answer.
I mean, if I may respond to this, just I don't want people to mistake what I call technological literacy with being able to use a computer. I think my example with being able to add numbers and making light of this is a big issue. And I think the debates we are having are heavily emotional and are not grounded in what automation is able to do and what it actually is able to do. I believe that if we really wanted to do automation on a large scale, we could change society right now to an extent that people couldn't imagine, and we don't need robots for that.
Okay, good answer.
Thebe?
Janus, congratulations on the baby. You're not worried that the next one's going to be done by a robot, are you?
Pardon, I didn't understand the question. I think I'm a bit too nervous, so.
I'm saying you're not worried that your next baby will be fathered by a robot, are you?
Oh, I hope not. That would be terrible.
That'd be terrible.
It wouldn't be my baby, right? It should be my baby.
It should be your baby.
I mean, she looks cute. I hope I had something to do with that. But.
I don't get this idea that we have to pay people better, we have to educate them differently. Some people like Mother Teresa just want to be nice. They don't want to get more money.
Okay.
So, I mean, who said we all want to be tech geeks? Some of us are quite fine not being able to add. That's what makes this world a better place.
You're right.
So then why are you putting this idea if I'm right?
Not everyone has to be a tech geek, but you need to have some basic understanding of how all this stuff functions in order to make an informed decision about how your place in this world is. I mean, if you're not able to read and write, you won't be able to, navigate this world. 100 years ago, it was okay to not be able to read or write. And I think we are going towards a direction where not being able to understand technology is actually dangerous. Also we talked about this today, democracy even.
I don't agree.
Protecting yourself from data companies, collecting your, information, for example.
I don't agree. I think you put in too much credit to technology or to the relevance of it in your world. I think we're going to be just fine. The rest of us who can't do those things, don't you think? Are your parents tech lit?
Pardon?
Are your parents tech literate?
They are not.
Look at them. Look what they've done. They've raised a good boy.
They have. Oh, thank you so much.
And they didn't.
The thing is, my mom is a very smart woman. I mean, she has a PhD in medical cybernetics, right? And when it comes to, getting the router to work, for which I simply use Google or use a manual, she always asks me to, help her.
She's creating jobs.
And there is of course a
She's creating jobs and opportunities for other people. It's a value chain, right?
Let me address the point about being fine. I don't think replacing all of humans is going to be the issue. I think there is a critical point where a certain amount of people will be out of jobs. And this is a threshold which is much lower than we like to think about. And it is important to pay people to do work which is very, very crucial, helping elderly people, for example, and having them be able to live off of that. And that's what we should think about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll continue with our fourth finalist.
My name is Antoine Lévy. I do a PhD in economics at MIT in Boston. I'm interested in the way economic research can be useful in improving policymaking, in particular in France and in Europe more broadly. I've tried to be involved in European policymaking research and more generally in the way we can represent diverging interests throughout the continent. I think automation and artificial intelligence are going to change the way everyone works, and that includes policymakers. So we should think already, right now, of the way we're going to deal with this transformational change at the highest level of policymaking.
David Foster Wallace tells us of the story of two fish swimming upriver and meeting another one. The older fish asks, "How is the water today?" The two young fish look at each other, and one says, "What the hell is water?" All of you in this room, all of us really, we're a bit like the fish in the water. We talk about automation as if it were an external object, something affecting low-skilled workers, or manual laborers, truck drivers. But we're swimming in it. It will affect the way researchers, economists, policymakers do their daily job. I want to take the example of central banking and economic policymaking. Here is a profession where, for the past decades, a debate has been raging between those who advocate rules-based, predictable behavior, the German way, and those who prefer creativity, inventivity, and let politicians bend the rule in extraordinary times. This is the embodiment of the race between human and artificial intelligence. Central bankers obviously will have to yield to AI in a number of areas of current expertise. If we think, for example, of monitoring and regulating complex financial networks of interrelated institutions, a machine will map and make sense of them much better than a human mind. In the same way, reacting in real time to billions of unstructured data points will be better done by a machine than by a human who has to wait every quarter for the new GDP or inflation data releases. And as far as forecasting is concerned, machine learning and neural networks are doing already a much better job than human guesswork. But there are other fields where humans will still be required. And I think of that as in chess. The best world champions have been beaten by even the simplest of engines for the last 20 years. But a team composed of a human and a machine can beat the best computer. In the same way, policymakers, economists, central bankers will complement machines. If we think of interpreting and communicating the results of these AI models, we still need humans to make sense of them. Humans, for example, will tell you, unlike the machine who can give you the precise correlation between sunny days and ice cream sales, whether the sun caused the ice cream sales or the ice cream caused the sun. Another dimension where humans will still be held accountable is decision-making, moral judgment. Just like self-driving cars, where we still need ethical programmers to decide whether the car in critical accidents should save the passenger or the driver. In the same way, we will need to hold humans accountable for economic decisions that have a vast impact on people's lives. Think of saving Goldman Sachs or Lehman Brothers. So I still think we will be relevant, we will be needed. In economic policymaking, as much as everywhere else, The GPS can tell you your precise current location with incredible accuracy, but the moral compass will still be human. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine. Our panelists, Thebe.
Antoine, I love France, obviously. It's a beautiful country, you know, but they're famous for two things: protests and vacations, long vacations. I'm sure there's other things, but I'm going to read up about them. I don't know. But those two are no for certain. I think they're going to rise up in protest against your idea of giving us some credit. I think you need to give us human beings all the credit for those computers, because we are the ones who are creating all that idea. Don't say to me, we deserve some credit. I think you are underestimating and denigrating who we are as human beings.
So, Thebe, I think we also make great wine. But I agree with you. Humans are proud, and this pride should be taken care of. That dignity should be respected. And I think the issue is that we want the machines to do the dirty work, the work that we don't care about, and we want to concentrate on the areas where we think we can bring value added: interpretation, responsibility, decision-making. I think these cooperations between humans and machines will become easier over time, and giving some credit to the machine will be easier over time as AI becomes more clever and we feel, you know, more sympathetic to them. And we feel like Siri deserves some of the credit for finding the route to the Gallen Symposium, for example.
So the only thing that confuses me about all this is we talk about robots and AIs as if these things are creating themselves on the side. And now you're talking about them cooperating. Let's talk about this now. You know, this sounds like that's what it is. Let's talk about this, me robot and you human, you created me. So who's going to survive this? So you can't make it like that. There's no cooperation here. We are the superior ones.
I don't think they're creating themselves. But at the same time, we should recognize that the current time is very different from the past. What defines AI is this ability to do some degree of unsupervised learning. So we are no longer totally in charge of what's going on in a neural network and machine learning algorithms. We already talked about that. We are still, at a high level, responsible for making them, and we should make these decisions in a fashion that is giving to human dignity its fair share. But we don't know what's going on under the engine. And I think because of that, we need to respect, to some extent, the autonomy of the machine in order to perfectly divide the work between us and the techs.
Or destroy them and do what we're supposed to do.
Stephan.
Just before I ask you a question, I don't like disagreeing with Thebe in public, but there are machines, as it were, working on the creation of machines. So this notion that there is a straightforward link between entirely human programmers and entirely machine-based outputs is no longer true. Antoine, it's difficult to resist your kind of Goldilocks solution. What you're essentially saying is not too hot, not too cold, not too human, not too algorithmic, and if only we remembered that, it would all be fine. That's essentially a summary of what you've just told.
So,
now I'm with you on that.
I thought French were not known for their moderation, so you know we can do that. No, I think it's indeed a Goldilocks solution, as you say, because that's the optimistic scenario. There is a pessimistic scenario in which we are not able to divide the shares of work between machines and humans.
Well, it's not so much the divisions of labor, it's also the autonomy problem. So there is another version of this story which says that as we outsource a bunch of things that look apparently simply computational, what we're also doing is outsourcing a bunch of things that absolutely co-opt humans' ability to regulate and govern them. Absolutely. And that is when people voice their anxiety about this stuff, that is exactly what they mean. What they mean is that we are teetering on the verge of creating organic creativity that is decoupled from the long history of us understanding how to make mistakes. And if you want to test for this, test whether search algorithms are neutral, okay, or whether they have profoundly hard to predict outcomes. Anyway, you get the idea.
No, absolutely. I agree. I think we need to think of this issue of cooperation and this issue of autonomy in a less horror film scenario kind of way, which is always what it tends to do, and some renowned scientists have warned us about autonomous weapons and all of these potential terrible applications of artificial intelligence. I think they might happen, but as I say, they will involve human moral judgments, bad moral judgments in that case, but these are precisely the cases where we should hold the humans accountable for bad uses of the machines. So keep some degree of human accountability, and the machines won't be doing what you don't want them to do.
Elena?
Yeah, I think you're right. There are so many examples already of the industries that thrive on this collaboration between humans and machines. And one of such examples is actually our industry, cybersecurity. You know, with an average large company being attacked 1,000 times per hour, it's the collaboration between human and machines is actually the only way for us to proceed and be able to withstand this scale of attacks. But I was curious, you know, so also building on the previous essay that talked about kind of like how technology literacy is important. You also kind of mentioned that those skills or knowledge of this collaboration between human and machines is almost like a career-breaking or career-making knowledge. So what do you think will happen to those individuals who might not necessarily choose this path, but rather kind of stick to more traditional roles in the near time?
I totally agree that this is the key question that we will face. Some people will update their skills. They will cooperate with the machines, even in a very material way. They will have brain-computer interfaces and all of these ways to improve their abilities by building on this cooperation. Others will not, and that's where current inequality comes into play. The access to these new technologies, the access to this potential for cooperation has to be equalized as much as possible. So the equality of opportunities is no longer only about equality of opportunities at school in learning how to read and write. It's equality of opportunities in this access to human enhancement. And I think this is where we should focus right now, our effort for the next 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great,
Thank you very much, Antoine. And we come to our 5th finalist.
My name's Nat Ware, I'm from Sydney. I'm doing a PhD at Oxford in the UK. One of my main involvements over the past 10 years has been running a non-profit consultancy called 180 Degrees Consulting, and we help non-profits and social enterprises to improve and expand their services around the world. I think too often AI, machine learning, robotics, all that's relegated to a field on its own, when in reality it affects every area of daily life and will only do so more in the coming decades.
Human history is littered with false dichotomies. George Bush's us or them, for profit or for impact, human jobs or robot jobs. Too often that is how the choice is framed, in everything from online clickbait articles to parliamentary debates. Even in academic journal articles, traditionally neoclassical economics assumes 2 inputs into the production process, 2 different types of capital, physical and human. Here's the bad news. If that is the choice we face, human jobs or robot jobs, it'll be lose-lose. We'll either stifle progress or we're going to stifle equality. The reality is that if we try to beat machines, we're going to lose, for the simple fact that AI is improving at a much faster rate than human intelligence. Unfortunately, evolution's quite slow. It's only a matter of time before we reach technological singularity. But here's the good news. That isn't the choice we face. Here's why. It's the potential for hybridization. Hybrid human physical capital can, should, and must become the optimal input into the production process. As the great philosopher Jim Henson once said, if you can't beat them, join them. We need to ride the technological trends that we're seeing by becoming inextricably linked to them. Now, in the essay I wrote, I put down a 5-pronged, 5-step strategy for human augmentation, for how we can achieve that necessary hybridization. Step one, we need to even the playing field when it comes to production input subsidies. As was already mentioned, at the moment there's a tax difference when it comes to the inputs, where human labor is taxed, which means that from an employer's perspective, it's more costly for a given after-tax income, whereas a robot substitute isn't taxed. We need to correct the unfair disadvantage that humans are facing, and there are a myriad of ways that we might be able to do that. So that will buy humans time to get retrained, which leads to step two. The education curricula needs to move into the modern era. I think it's absurd that in most school curriculums around the world, the words AI, VR, blockchain, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and so on, they're mentioned precisely 0 times. We prioritize Shakespeare and Latin-based languages over AI and programming languages. That needs to change. Students need to know about the world they're going to live in. Not only that, but we need to change the education structure. Step 3. The entire education system at the moment is based on the assumption of minimal job obsolescence. That's why we have education concentrated early in one's life, at one point in time, often outside of cities, often for a long duration. We need to move from a linear model of training, then work, to a cyclical model of training, work, training, work, training, work, and so on. But in order for that education shift to occur, step 4, and also in order for risk-averse individuals to transition from being consumers to being designers, controllers, and creators, something that'll be necessary, we need to minimize the potential personal financial downside from taking risks. We need to increase financing options. We need to reform safety nets. That'll help in the medium term. But in the long term, we need innovation, investment, and adoption of technologies that improve fundamental human capabilities. We need to integrate technology and biology as part of the 4th Industrial Revolution. Everything from exoskeletons to integrated, connected contact lenses to enable AI to provide analysis and recommendations before our very eyes. This potentially enables us to have the best of both worlds. The creativity and emotional intelligence of humans with the computational power and big data-enabled predictive capabilities of technology. Those 5 steps provide a roadmap to human augmentation. They're strategies that I'll personally be employing via consulting, entrepreneurship, advocacy, and they're also strategies that I encourage everyone to pursue and support. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if we're to avoid human jobs becoming a relic of history, a symbol of the elite, or a thing of fiction, hybridization, I believe, should be our augmentation strategy. We need to make human AI work superior to AI work alone. We need to change from a binary economic system to a hybrid economic system. We need to become inextricably linked with technology if we're to have a future that works for all. Thank you.
Start with Elena.
Sure. Nate, you raised so many great points about the curriculum and relevance of education and training. And just to give you one example from, say, our industry, of a thing that was not necessarily taught in school, but that our industry has spent millions on. And this is training people not to click on the emails they don't recognize. And
it's a losing battle, so.
Right, so we've literally spent hundreds of millions of dollars, as customers, clients, vendors, on training them, and still phishing is #1 way to get inside the organizations. So I was wondering, have you thought about specific educational training strategies that might actually work for people at scale and at a rate that will not be, too slow to catch up with?
Yeah, I don't think perfect should be the enemy of the good, and I'm sure there will still be people who click on those emails, including people in political parties in the US. But I think that we want to move forward, and I think the question is, what's the counterfactual? And the reality is, at the moment, education curriculums around the world have not changed, in many cases, in years or decades. And so it's not going to be perfect, but there's a great need for transformation and change in that area. So in terms of the specific training, I think the key thing is that regardless of what you teach someone in school, that's not necessarily going to be relevant in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And as I was saying, our whole education model needs to change from a model where universities are associated with people in their 20s. That needs to change. It needs to be the norm for people who are 30, 40, 50, 60 to get trained. That needs to be socially acceptable. And unfortunately, there's pushback, or some people feel like they're not welcome if they go for retraining in the current education environment.
Thanks.
Thebe.
Two things. What if, because I'm interested in this taxation thing, because it was raised by Joao earlier, and I meant to follow up on it. What if those robots learn from our friends in Greece and stop paying tax?
So
how are we going to sustain this economy? Because now you are saying you're going to tax them.
That wasn't actually what I was saying.
Wait, I don't know. Explain it to me. I told you I'm not that way.
So what I said was that there's a distortion at the moment where one input into production is taxed and the other one isn't. And what I said is that in order to correct that disruption or distortion, which leads to inefficiency, we want them to be more similar. There's various ways that we could do that. We could reduce labor income tax as well, and have other forms of taxation as well to minimize and reduce that inefficiency. Certainly, as was mentioned, it is very, very difficult to define what a robot is, and I don't think that can be done well. It might be able to be done well in particular industries, that's one option, but there's various proposals that have been put forward by the European Commission, by Bill Gates and likewise, about alternatives to sort of a robot tax that have the same or close to the same effect.
I don't know how you're going to do that, but I'm worried about the second thing linked to that in a way. Now, I'm human, last time I checked. And if you are going to incentivize me to catch up, I'm going to go to France and go lie on the beach while the robots work and collect my social security while I'm trying to catch up. So I'm worried about this idea that you have that I need to be incentivized to catch up to the robots. Because I'm not going to catch up, I'm getting paid for it. I'm going to relax on the beach. So how are you going to really incentivize me to catch up with that robot?
I'm not proposing forcing you to do anything. If you want to lie on a beach, welcome to. I think what I'm in favor of is changing what is the norm. And at the moment, the reality is the norm is to be educated at one point and then live off that for the rest of your life. My granddad worked in 2 accounting firms for 70 years. That used to be the norm. We need to change what is the norm. Obviously, if individuals want to behave in different ways, I don't want to force them to do otherwise. But I think that the incentives and the systems and the structures that we have in place definitely need to change.
Thank you. Stephan.
Thank you. I like your 5-point plan, and I like its clarity. I have 2 questions for you. One is broadly economic, and one is broadly philosophical. At least since about the 17th century, we've been worried about something called the mind-body problem. Okay? And it's behind lots of very serious conversations about very important questions. What you seem to be proposing is a humanity that is augmented, okay, where the devices that are currently external, let's call it my phone, might be internal, and we start to blend certain kinds of computation with certain kinds of traditionally human capacity. Do you not think that that risks making the mind-body problem just a little bit of a blip in the kinds of things humans worry about? That's the philosophy question. I'll come to the economics question in a second.
I think it's hard to generalize, and it very much depends on the technologies that we're talking about. So if you had connected contact lenses, for example, and a mathematician was trying to do a proof, the AI could suggest a next step in that proof. Have you thought about this? Have you done this? If a painter is painting and the AI could suggest the optimal color combination here is X or Y.
And you're not worried about feedback loops? You're not worried that that person then becomes a function of their contact lens?
No, I think that that is necessary, and I think that is improving human capabilities in a way that will be beneficial and will keep humans relevant.
Okay, economics question. There's something that economists call the lump of labor fallacy. You're probably familiar with this, which is that there's a finite amount of labor, and when you get new technologies, jobs are reduced because the denominator stays the same. Do you believe that, or do you believe that the lump of labor fallacy is the lump of labor fallacy?
I certainly believe that many, many new jobs will be created from the trends that we're seeing. I also think that at the moment we're grossly unprepared to do those jobs. So I both think that there will be jobs in the future, but we need to not just rely on that assumption and not just say these jobs will be there for the taking. We need to be prepared for those jobs, and we need to act now to ensure that in 2 years, 5 years, 10, 20 years, we can take those jobs that are created.
So
and
you're
we can create
a traditionalist. The lump of labor fallacy exists.
Thank you very much, Nat. And thank you to our... Thank you to our 5 finalists. Thank you very much to our 3 panelists for your very probing and insightful questions. We come to a very difficult part now where we're going to ask you to vote. So take out your mobile device. You'll see that a vote will become available, and you're going to vote for the most compelling presenter, the most compelling idea. And while you do that, I just wanted to let you know again that the awards have already been decided. Those were based solely on the essays and decided by the award jury. But in honor of this event and the potential win here, we do want to give you a little token of something. So each year, the St. Gallen Symposium commissions a unique work of art to commemorate that year's event. And this year's lithograph is produced by the famed Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava. So I'm going to invite Elena Kessler from the Leaders of Tomorrow team to come up with that. We are going to see, give it a minute, maybe 20, 30 seconds more, and we're going to reveal who the winner was, and she will present them with that token of appreciation from the audience. So I assume there's no technical difficulties, that we're doing okay? I'm hearing, so raise your hand actually if you're having difficulty voting. Okay, something in the center here. It's an unusual, there's no particular reason why it would be this section of the audience. So we have our technical gurus in the back who are very quickly trying to figure out what's going on. We'll give it a few more seconds.
Speaker?
Good, okay, so we're going to reveal the audience selection for the best presenter, and that is Nat Ware. Congratulations. Thank you very much. So at this point, I want to invite up the president of the award jury, Georg von Kroh, to present the awards.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here, and I hope you sympathize with the award jury in this incredibly difficult task it's been to actually select 3 of the winners of this fierce competition. And just to say a couple of words about the process, you know, how do we really work in this competition? We had this year more than 1,200 submissions of essays, and these are generally of very, very high quality. Then there is a very large jury called the pre-jury, of PhD students mainly, who investigate these essays. They look at the essays from all different types of angles. And then the 10 best essays are passed on to the main jury, or the award jury, that I'm presiding. And ahead of the symposium, we have selected 5, without knowing who these 5 people are, 5 of the best essays, and these 5 best essays are represented on stage. Now this morning, again without knowing who these people are, we have no clue about their country of origin, their gender. We had no clue about the universities that they come from, what they studied, the level of study, and so on. We selected 3 based solely on the quality of the essay. As you look to the left, what you see in the center, it might be gone, you know, in a couple of years, but it's actually the tip of a pen, right? And this is an award that goes to the person or those persons who have been able to write the best essay with a lot of literary qualities, qualities of argumentation, and so on. Are you excited? So, yeah, just one last piece. Okay. Excited? Right, okay. Very good. So one last piece of information. I said something about blindness in this particular process, and it turns out that the 3 award winners here have gone through 5 selection points which all have been blind, but the jury at different points in time have not known anything about the identity. We have just looked purely at the essays. Okay, are you ready? Okay, so yeah, let me start with this envelope. That's the 3rd place. And can I have a Drum roll, please. The third place goes to João Abreu from Harvard University. The award jury notes about this particular essay that you wrote that it's very bold. It is global. It takes a truly global scope. It includes countries of different stages of development, economic development, political development. And the concept of human-robot cost gap could actually become, potentially, believes the award jury, an important instrument for policymaking. So well done. Thank you. So, the second place goes to, can I have a drum roll? Thank you. Mr. Richard Janis Goldschmidt from University of Potsdam. Thank you very much. Okay, so the award jury notes about this particular essay that it really demystifies artificial intelligence. There are many, many good sort of words of wisdom and good sentences. For example, there's one sentence that I found very, very intriguing, and that is, there is no intelligence in AI, which is actually something that we can contemplate and talk more about over drinks later on. It's written from a very personal perspective. It's based on your personal experience as an entrepreneur, as a researcher. And it is really well argued with a lot of sort of excellent literary images. So well done. Thank you. Three to go. Three to go. One envelope. The first place, and this, you know, if you think about expectancy value in economics, it's very, very low in this particular competition. You have less than sort of 0.1% chance of winning this particular prize that I'm holding in my hand. And the first place goes to Mr. Nat Weir from the University of Oxford. Thank you. For the second time, huh? Okay. Thank you. Very well done. Yeah. So the award jury notes about this particular essay that it's hugely comprehensive. You cover a lot of terrain, which is positive, and you present 5 very concrete strategies that we believe might actually be helpful for reaching a solution to the future of work, the way that we're looking at it. And again, there is a statement that I would like to read, which I think was very interesting. If you care about your job, you should care about the jobs of others as well. It's a very, very powerful statement if you think about it. Very well done. And again, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the 3 winners, as well as the 2 people who didn't get the award this time. You are allowed to try next year as well. So see you all in the year. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's great. You have a photo show.
So while they are taking their photos, we just want to transition now. In this, the 30th anniversary year, we have the opportunity to look back. The Wings of Excellence Award has been in existence since 1989, and we want to see what has the impact been. What have the students who have participated in this event gone on to do? And we have 3 stories of former students who are here, and they'll tell you which year they were here. And first, we're going to see a video of their particular impact in their countries, and then we'll have a conversation with them directly.
The major problem of Ghana is a question of the quality of political leadership that we have. I thought that the best way to deal with it was to start some movement of thinkers that would ensure that we research the problem and somehow manage to convince our leaders that there are better ways of dealing with the problem. My name is Franklin Kujo. I'm Ghanaian. I run a think tank in Ghana called Imani Center for Policy and Education. We are currently at my university. This was the place I wrote the essay for the St. Gallen Symposium in 2001. When I learned that I've been selected and invited to the St. Gallen Symposium, it was a joyous moment for me. It sounded to me as if my world of opportunities had just opened. It was the first time I was going to travel out of the country. Actually, the first time I was going to sit in an aeroplane. The impact St. Gallen had on starting Imani was quite frankly enormous. From the conversations I had with my good friend Stephan, we found out that there were better ideas to run countries, to make countries more effective. Hi, good morning everyone. Good morning. Imani is a think tank based in Ghana. We've been ranked severally in the top 5 most influential think tanks in Africa and the most influential think tank in Ghana since 2012. Imani typically researches on trade, taxes, healthcare, education, and technology. Imani was established in 2004, and there was a need for a think tank like that because the established think tanks of the continent at the time had a one-way track of dealing with issues. We would essentially speak to a small group of elites and then cater to them, and then nothing was changing. Well, our strategy to get our messages out are twofold. First of all, we ensure that the messaging is quite clear. The second part is the vehicle to convey this message, which is the media. The media has been our most important ally because they are the ones who carry our messages across.
Imani is unique. If you are not careful who you speak to, you are going to always be pushed between one political party or the other. So Imani provides a very refreshing, independent, alternative voice. We don't always agree with some of the positions they take, but we think that they make it easier for us to do good quality work quicker.
The biggest success of Imani has to do with a project we started and called Imanifesto. It's essentially a framework that we developed at Imani in order to gauge the viability or profitability or the feasibility of campaign promises made by politicians. Imani's Manifesto changed the course of political campaigns in the country forever, when the impact was enormous in 2016 when we forced politicians to back their promises with numbers. For me, it's humbling enough when I hear my finance minister, Franklin, let's meet and chat about the budget. When I get a message from the vice president, let's meet Franklin, let's talk about some of the policies I've introduced, right? That is being called to the table, and that's what matters. If you're not called to the table of decision makers, I don't think you have the influence yet. My hope for Ghana is a country that would not ever need aid ever again. I like to see women in leadership in this country. I like to see a woman president. I have more women at my think tank than men because women are smarter. And I hope that I can live in a country where my kids will be free to do anything they want.
There is a mental health crisis in India, and domestic violence and other forms of interpersonal violence are intensifying this crisis. Mental illness and abuse are so closely related, and there is a dire need in this country to speak about both of these issues simultaneously. I'm Ashwini Nataraja Vanishri. I'm a doctoral student of psychology from India. I'm also the founder-director of Mukta Foundation. When I was invited to St. Gallen, I was thrilled to bits, really excited to know that I would be amidst leaders of today and meeting a whole bunch of leaders of tomorrow. Focus formula that I presented at St. Gallen Symposium has provided a framework for the way we function at Mukta Foundation. It was an acronym for a set of 5 micro-strategies to promote mental health in low and middle income countries. The stamp of validation I received at St. Gallen Symposium for my idea increased my confidence exponentially and encouraged me to start Mukta Foundation much earlier than I would have done otherwise. In 2016, it started off as a small project. I called it Mukta Project. And we started off with prevention of child sexual abuse workshops for mental health professionals in Bangalore. The reception was so good, and then people wanted to learn more and more. And that's when in 2017, I converted Mukta Project into Mukta Foundation. We have conducted programs in over 12 states and reached over 1 million people directly. We conduct a wide range of programs. We're trying to promote expressive forms of therapy, like that of creative movement therapy, storytelling, play therapy, arts therapy, as opposed to the conventional talk-based therapies. The ramifications of going through an abusive experience could be so traumatic that it's better to prevent it beforehand. So, and we've noticed how with information, children feel empowered and then they're confident. And with that confidence, I think prevention is certainly possible. Two of the biggest challenges have been not having enough mental health professionals experienced on these topics, and at the same time not knowing the regional languages has certainly been a problem then, and it's still a problem today. This is my parents' place. I usually come here after a project to rejuvenate, and then when I go back, there's a renewed sense of energy for yet another project. So in the near future, I really wish that our country has zero tolerance for interpersonal abuse, and mental health is our topmost priority.
Here in Nepal, we are facing different types of natural disasters: earthquake, flood, landslide, and many more. I saw the people were dying every year and the politicians were doing nothing. Then I decided to do something about it. My name is Jagdish Kharel. I am a television journalist in Nepal. I like my job because I work with new topics every day. I am interested in political stories, social stories, cultural stories, investigative stories. In 2012, I was invited by St. Gallen. I could meet several personalities and change makers. That inspired me to make a difference in my country, Nepal. Before, disaster risk reduction was not in priority of politicians. They didn't used to talk, they didn't used to speak about the disaster. I went to the people first, especially the affected people by flood and the landslide even. So I raised the voice from there. They were suffering since a long time from the disaster. That voice I brought to the district level and the local government level. Then again, with the support from district level or local level government and the community, all those voices I brought to the central level. Since 5 years, continuously, I have been producing and broadcasting the weekly television program, Talk of the Town. I became the watchdog for 5 years until the politician and Parliament passed the Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act from the Parliament. The new act is related to prevention, rescue, relief, rehabilitation and reconstruction of the complete cycle of disaster. If it will be implemented effectively, I think Nepal will be able to face the disaster. The biggest challenges was politicians. They did all type of commitment, even written, verbal. We did follow up. We created the pressure, but they were not serious at the beginning. But gradually, we made it possible. Without St. Gallen Symposium, I would not have started media advocacy. Now, it helps to save thousands of lives. My aim of life is to make this country prosperous. So maybe near in future, you will see me being active in the politics. I wish my country and our responsibility also to make this country beautiful, civilized, developed, and prosperous.
So thank you very much for sharing your stories. The three who were featured in the video are actually here with us today, and they are part of an initiative that we've started this year in the anniversary year to create something called the St. Gallen Handbook for Making Ideas Work. And over the last 2 days, they've actually been working very hard with other leaders from St. Gallen to develop an output that we'll be using tomorrow at the end that can be distributed, that distills and crystallizes some of their ideas. So let me start with you, Franklin, just very quickly. What are you learning? What are some of the findings from this work so far?
Well, thank you, Jason. When we were chosen, I'm sure we were not conceited at all that we had the best ideas to put into a handbook. But over the last 2 days, we have realized, after doing some introspection, that our professional and individual lives are actually hinged on the vision and the mission statements we set for ourselves. And it is most likely very easy to stray from your vision and your mission. So we put out strategies to ensure that we do not do that. The other point I need to add quickly was on stakeholder management. I mean, some of us interface a lot with politicians and civil society actors, and that environment can be very, very abrasive. We learned that there are better ways of engaging our stakeholder community, and that's what we did.
Excellent, thank you. So personal mission and vision and making sure you interact with stakeholders effectively. Ashwini, what have you been learning?
We've realized how important the psychological aspects pertaining to conceiving the idea, implementing and sustaining our initiatives are. So that's going to be one of the focus areas. The other aspects also include how one could inoculate oneself to deal with stress and anxiety in a much better manner while trying to convert our ideas into action. So we have this and a lot more, Jason.
Got it. So talking about psychology and resilience.
Yeah.
Jagdish.
Yeah, proper policy, scientific method, and effective implementation is essential to achieve the goal, as well as bringing hope and building trust can make us successful.
Right. So. Very good. Thank you. That point of trust is very well taken. The St. Gallen Handbook is actually still being developed, so tomorrow at 10:30, this team, along with others, is continuing to work on that. If that's something that you're interested in being part of, we welcome you to join them in the Leaders of Tomorrow Corner. Again, that's at 10:30. And now we'll transition to our speaker for tonight. If you have been to a bookstore or a newsstand in the last, let's say, 40 years, you know our next speaker's name. Steve Forbes is the chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, responsible for a number of initiatives across the media landscape, including ones like Forbes 40 Under 40, Forbes 30 Under 30, which is actually relevant. St. Gallen has had people on that list. But perhaps most relevant for a symposium like this is as an undergraduate in 1968 at Princeton University, he founded a student organization called Business Today, which continues to operate today, running international conferences as well, which I was actually able to participate in as a student. So St. Gallen, you have a little bit of competition. So on this, the 30th anniversary of the Wings of Excellence Award, we're very honored to welcome Steve Forbes.
Well, thank you very much, Jason, for those very kind words. But after hearing what you three have done, after hearing those 5 finalists, what's going to happen now is just a letdown. But thankfully, it's the end of the day. Drinks are ahead, and so bear with me. But the theme, beyond the end of work, actually, we're entering an era where more and more people are going to have the end of work in a way in which not that you stop working, but you're going to be able to do the kind of work that fits your particular needs. You're going to less and less have to take a job because you have to, but more and more because it fits your particular talents. This is kind of specialization. That's going to discuss that in a moment. But right now, we'll have to overcome a lot of pessimism, a lot of anxiety about the future these days. But this kind of pessimism or uncertainty about the future is not new. Anytime you have a period of economic slowness or stagnation, which we had for the last decade, combined with enormous change, brings about the idea that somehow we're going to enter an era where a lot of us are going to be made irrelevant, forces are going to be beyond our control, and it's not going to be a very good future. Sometimes that anxiety contributes to great literature. 200 years ago, a book that came about because of the Industrial Revolution, electrification, still is a theme today, Frankenstein. But this worry about the future is nothing new. Back during the Great Depression, which was the worst economic disaster in modern history, John Maynard Keynes, the famed British economist, wrote an interesting essay, an intriguing essay called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. He wrote this in 1930. He said, "We are suffering just now from a bad attack of economic pessimism. It is common to hear people say that the epoch of enormous economic progress, that the rapid improvement in the standard of life is now going to slow down, that a decline in prosperity is more likely than an improvement. I believe," he said, "this is a wildly mistaken interpretation of what is happening to us." Now, he attributed the Depression to people trying to catch up to the great technological innovations, especially of the 1920s. I would dispute that, but there was no question that in the early 1930s, the prospects of humankind looked pretty grim. But in this essay, he goes on to ask, what can we reasonably expect the level of our economic life to be 100 years hence? Right about 2018, that's 88 years, but 12 years we can pretty much see. He said, what are the economic possibilities for our grandchildren? And then he makes the point, from the earliest times of which we have records, back, say, to 2,000 years before Christ, down to the beginning of the 1700s, there was no very great change likely in the standard of life of the average person living in the civilized centers of the earth. Ups and downs, certainly, but no real progress. Then suddenly things changed. Now again, we can debate what brought about those changes. This is what gives historians jobs, debating what happened in the 1700s and how we make that even more widespread today. But the fact of the matter is, life is infinitely better for most of the earth today than it was in 1930, and it will be infinitely better in ways we cannot even imagine in 2130. See, I'm showing my age, 2130. But about the concern about robots, artificial intelligence, well, robots have been around forever. We just didn't call them that. Labor-saving devices, starting with the wheel, making it easier to move things. Go online tonight and call up Bing or Google, whatever search engine you want to use, and call up the washer board and see this device where people, especially women, had to really just destroy their hands trying to wash clothes, get the dirt out. Well, a robot came along, but because we didn't call it a robot, we don't recognize it as such. It's called the washing machine. Makes this infinitely easier. The car, made reference earlier, horse-drawn wagons. One of the biggest robots happened in agriculture, the invention of the tractor. Before the tractor, literally tens of millions of acres had to be set aside to grow forage for farm animals. Suddenly with the tractor, that acreage could be free. You could develop it, look at it, grow more food for humans instead of animals, but an enormous, enormous change. So each of these periods is always marked by anxiety. Well, that was back then, but this time it is different. Actually, it's not different at all. Because the fact of the matter is, no matter how bright we are, we cannot predict the future. We can predict the future, but if we knew the future, then socialism could work. We could plan for it. But things keep happening in ways that no one could predict. My own industry, the print industry, 20 years ago, none foresaw what enormous change would come from what the internet would do to traditional print journalism. This makes us have to remind us from time to time of what the great guru, business guru, the late Peter Drucker once said. He said, every organization should ask itself, what is our mission? What is our purpose? What is it we are trying to do? If you ask those questions, then you get less hung up, less frightened by the fact that the means to achieve that purpose can change. Well, we certainly saw it in our industry. Now this then gets moving forward, making progress. And this gets to a very basic question. This is why I love St. Gallen. It gets to your essence, is ask a very basic question that Tom Sowell and others asked. What is the difference between us today and people in the Stone Age? Same planet, same resources, same appetite, same human body. The basic difference between us and them is we know more. We have more knowledge. Even when you get great physical disasters, whether they're natural disasters or human-made disasters like wars, if knowledge is not destroyed, you can recover and move ahead. We saw this most dramatically after World War II. Much of Europe destroyed physically, massive amounts of physical destruction in Europe and in Asia. Tens of millions of people killed. Experts thought it would be a couple of generations before we could possibly recover. But with the US military security umbrella, and because knowledge was not destroyed, Western Europe and Japan quickly recovered to pre-war levels of production and then exceeded them. Why? Knowledge was not destroyed. When you look around the challenges of today, take the most essential thing, water. Take the state of Israel, modern state of Israel, created in 1948 in a desert. If you look at rainfall there, it is declining. You'd think they'd have a real crisis on its hand. And yet, if you take Israel from 1948 to today, its population has increased tenfold. Its agricultural output has increased 16-fold. Its industrial production has increased 50-fold. And yet the net use of water, not per capita, but the net use of water in that country today is 10% less than it was 70 years ago. Why? Because of human knowledge, human ingenuity. Whether it's a shower head that feels just as good anywhere but uses 1/3 of the water, it's very sophisticated use of drip technology in agriculture. In my country, farms still, many of them just throw the water out there instead of applying it specifically. Or desalination plants. Israel has several desalination plants. Literally can recycle water, turn salt water into usable water. Human ingenuity. The real resources of a society is always the human mind, despite physical obstacles that can be thrown in the way. But you also have, and this gets to politics, knowledge can only advance through experimentation. Knowledge can only advance where breakthroughs are protected, where the powerless can challenge the powerful, where you can go against establishments and not fear for your life because you're disrupting social harmony or something like that. Take China. You're all familiar with the story. Chinese sailors in the late 1400s, early 1500s were developing ships, navigational skills as good as better than the Europeans. But the Mandarins decided they didn't like this. The ships were busted. The sailors were told if they ever sailed outside Chinese waters, don't come back because you'll be executed. China stagnated there in other areas where they're far ahead of the rest of the world in technology, and we're still living with the repercussions of what happened, especially in the 1800s, what happened to China. We're still living with those repercussions today. So you need knowledge, but you need the power of experimentation, whether in the laboratory, in the marketplace, or elsewhere to get that new knowledge. Now, another thing that's not always popular to say today, when you allow free markets, where you don't impede people You have to have always obviously have to have sensible rules and the like, where people can challenge and come up with new things, new ways of doing things. Markets will always, markets are people, let's remember that. Markets will always turn scarcity into abundance, turn today's luxuries into tomorrow's commonplaces. More than one person has said, if you want to see how less well people off today will live tomorrow, look at how rich people live today. Because in free markets, that's how they'll be living tomorrow. People, even with low incomes, handheld devices, inconceivable a few years ago. Take the automobile. 120 years ago, typical car cost the equivalent of over 100,000 Swiss francs, over 80, 90,000 euros. And along came Henry Ford, gifted set of engineers, moving assembly line, turned a toy for the rich into something every working person could afford. Take handhelds or cell phones. First one, 1982, came from Motorola. Cost $3,995 US. And it was as big as a shoebox, weighed like a brick, 40-minute battery life, and all it could do was voice. Today, even the Apple X, not the best, well, not going to get into that, but is only $1,000. And look at all the things they can do. If you had said 20 years ago your grandmother could operate a supercomputer, which back then would have occupied the size of the room, you'd have been considered crazy. Today, grandma and anyone with a handheld has the equivalent of a supercomputer. And so this again, turning today's luxuries, today's rarities into tomorrow's commonplaces. Take widescreen TVs. If you'd bought one 15, 20 years ago, you'd have paid $15,000 or $20,000. Now, a few hundred euros, anyone can get them, and they're better than they were in the past. Economists do their profession a disservice by defining it as the allocation of scarce resources. That does not get the heart thumping, allocation of scarce resources. Really, the more exciting thing is creating resources. Take, for example, what we call a natural resource, oil. In and of itself, oil is just gooey stuff. Glop. You can't eat it. Can't drink it. You can't feed it to cows, can't feed animals. It's worthless. Used to depress property values. And this stuff would seep up in places like Pennsylvania. What turned this goo into something the modern world still can't live without, maybe it will someday, but not now, was human ingenuity. Turned this glop into something that has created the modern economy. You take the information age, symbolized by the chip. Silicon. Silicon's a fancy word for sand. Whoever knew as a kid when you're on the beach, no shortage of sand. Those grains could become the basis of literally having the world at your fingertips, a supercomputer in your hand. And so the chip and all the manifestations of it, robots, whatever you want to call it, is extending the reach of the human brain the way machines extended the reach of human muscle, starting with the Industrial Revolution. And so in terms of moving ahead, the real obstacles are not human ingenuity. It's there. And people keep trying. They learn from their failures. That's the thing about experimentation. Even when things don't work, if you have open markets, openness to new knowledge, you learn from the past. Back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, Apple came out with a new device called the Newton, handheld. The people who invented it had IQs that could boil water. But the thing flopped. But from that failure came a new technology that set the basis for the iPod, the iPad, and the iPhone. Even created a new company that provided the capital when Steve Jobs came back to turn that company around. And so in terms of technology, it changes things more than politics. Now, I participated in politics, didn't work out very well, which is why I'm here today. But politics is often a lagging indicator. The real changers are people doing innovative things, whether it's responding to disasters, dealing with things like abuses and the like, trying to get the political class some accountability and tools to make things a little better. All of that comes from people working on the outside, affecting the political scene. You take the Industrial Revolution, profoundly changed the narrow politics of England, Britain, Reform Law of 1832, when they used to teach history. That came not from political initiatives. That came from the Industrial Revolution, changing, creating a new class of people, new occupations, and then you got the political changes with it. People were once tied to the land. Rise of railroads, not to mention automobiles and airplanes, gave people mobility so they could have more opportunity if they saw it elsewhere. It was technology that made food more and more cheaper, more and more available. Where you have shortages, it's because of political obstacles and the like, not because nature can't provide it with the right circumstances. Upsetting the taxi cartel came from Uber and Lyft. And that's the thing. You have to have an environment where people can do things without asking permission. And it's all about meeting the needs and wants of others. Now, Steve Jobs was once asked, when he was once asked, do you do marketing surveys? He said, no. He replied, because people don't know what they want until I show them. The man did not lack for self-esteem. But he made a very good point about entrepreneurship, which many of you are engaged in, and that is trying to find what is a need, even if people don't know they need it, and putting it out there and seeing if they respond to it. They may respond in ways you hadn't anticipated, but you put it out there. You don't know if it's going to succeed. And this gets about the wonderful thing, amazing thing about innovation. There's a lot of talk about establishments and how they can control things. With innovation, establishments are always changing. None of you are old enough to remember the 1970s. Yeah, that's called pandering. Some of you do remember the 70s, but the 70s were a terrible decade economically, racked by inflation, high interest rates. Everyone thought we weren't going to grow again, one of those periods of pessimism. But look what was being incubated, certainly in the United States during the 70s. FedEx, Apple, Oracle, Microsoft, Amgen, numerous other companies became the giants of today. 20 years ago, within a generation, Google was once a number. Now it's taking over the world. Not really, I'll get to that in a moment. Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, what they now call the FANGs. You can tell from babies, they now become monsters. But there'll be other monsters in the future. You take Amazon. Now Walmart is suddenly on defense. Well, Walmart put Sears on defense in my country. Sears was once one of the biggest retailers in the world. Then Walmart came along. How did Walmart do it? It's 50 years ago, 55 years ago, early 1960s, small Northwest Arkansas retailer. So how did Sam Walton become the giant, make this such a giant? Because even though it was small, he did something that every entrepreneur should realize. You don't have to invent something. You can take something and use it better than those who invented it. For example, in the case of Walmart, one of the biggest things that came out of World War II in terms of innovation was the mainframe computer, originally designed to make it easier to calculate the trajectory of artillery shells. Now, obviously, computers have many more uses than artillery shells, but who made the most money from the mainframe? It wasn't the originator. That company went by the wayside. IBM became the dominant manufacturer in the field, so its competitors largely went by the wayside. IBM itself, in the early 90s, had one foot in the corporate graveyard. The one who made the most money from the mainframe was Sam Walton. He recognized that if he used these computers with specialized software, he could manage inventories better than his bigger rivals, who were 50, 100 times the size. He could manage only the supply chain better. And so for a while, Walmart became the giant taking over the world. Now it's becoming hit by Amazon. So, so the thing about, the glory about innovation is it comes from people from the most unlikely backgrounds. I mentioned Jobs, abandoned by his biological parents, never got over it. Larry Ellison, orphan. Look what he did in creating Oracle. Sarah Blakely with Spanx. She was once selling fax machines. Didn't like the fact in the part of the country she was working in the US, she was always sweating, trying to come up with new ways. Invented Spanx. Who would have thought of it? Give you another example. Countries can change. Now, I know there are a lot of French here. One of the finalists was French, but France economically has not performed very well, seen as very much of a laggard. Strikes and all that, great wine, but a lot of strikes. But that country now, we'll see how it plays out, remarkably, is at the beginnings of a renaissance, beginning to transform itself into a tax-cutting, job-creating, entrepreneurial hotbed. Now, with Macron as president, there's still a lot of obstacles to overcome. But the next time you go to Paris, yes, nice to see the Eiffel Tower and drink the wine and great restaurants and all that kind of stuff, Notre Dame. But take time out to visit a thing called Station F. Station F, formerly railroad stations linked together, Station F is now the world's largest incubator of startups. 3,000 nascent entrepreneurs in action at Station F. Every major tech company is now involved with Station F. Amazing thing to see what they've done. Who would have thought it? Paris, France. Now sort of a Silicon Valley rising there. So things can change. Things can change. Macron just announced to us, now it's around the world, he's going to get rid of a 30% exit tax. If you're an entrepreneur in France, you wanted to remove some of your wealth, they hit you with a tax, which meant you weren't going to create the wealth in France in the first place. That's why 60,000 very talented French entrepreneurs moved to the United States over the years. That's beginning to change. So innovation, whether it's small stuff, you know, when you go to places like Starbucks, they have the 3 sizes, but you notice that even though the cup sizes are different sizes, they all have the same size lid, little things like that, so you don't have to have 3 different inventories of lids. One fits all. To big stuff, high tech, but also high tech now is affecting more of the physical industries. You see it in energy. 3D seismic modeling is doing things in terms of being able to drill that had never been thought possible before. You see it in agriculture. I mentioned drip technology, but whether it's GPS systems and the like, enormous changes taking place there. We think of farm as sort of thing that never changes, radically change thanks to technology. Blockchain, associated with cryptocurrencies right now, but actually what it's going to be doing, especially the next generation, is talk about disruption, is obliterate in the next 10 to 15 years, is going to obliterate the traditional payment systems. You know, when we have our credit cards, we think, oh, it's so seamless. You swipe the card, now you have to put it in my country, you have to put it in a chip now, which takes forever to clear, but anyway, that's supposed progress. But anyway, it does look fairly seamless. But there's still a very cumbersome, expensive process trying to clear all of these transactions. Blockchain is going to blow that away. Blockchain also is going to take care of, at least for now, the huge problem in security. Right now, what do they do about all this hacking? Well, change your access code 5 times a day. More and more, I mean, they're way behind the curve. Blockchain's going to change all that. Now, this gets to something that is not as glamorous as high tech or some other things. In fact, it can be rather boring, but it gets to the critical essence in terms of moving ahead. And that is money, monetary policy. Now, when you say monetary policy, even central bankers, that's why they drink a lot of coffee, their eyes glaze over. It's not the most exciting subject in the world. So let me just give you, as a reward for what I'm about to do to you in the next few minutes, a travel tip. If you ever find yourself in an airplane in coach, middle seat, on a runway, watching your life pass away, and you want a little bit of elbow room with your seatmates, start talking to them about monetary policy. They'll cut you a wide berth. Now we have a lot of young people, many of them unmarried. If you're on a bad date and want out, start talking about monetary policy. The evening will end quickly, and that person will stay away from you forever, guaranteed. But the reason this not intrinsically exciting subject is so very important is how do we make progress? It's interacting with each other. Do it billions of times a day. Money makes it possible. Interacting billions of times a day. If we had to do everything ourselves, we'd still be living in caves. Money allows us to specialize. So I can focus on what I need to do, but you're going to provide me with food, lodging, and everything else. Makes the world economy work. That's how we move forward. That's how we progress. But with all the falderall about money, just remember just two basic things. Money is like a claim check. You know, when you go in wintertime especially, you go to a restaurant, you take your coat, you get a claim check, maybe a piece of paper, a piece of plastic. That piece of paper, piece of plastic in and of itself is worthless. No intrinsic value. But it is a claim on a real product. A ticket to an event, theater, sports, whatever, could be a worthless piece of paper or worthless ellipses on your handheld. In and of itself worthless, but a claim on a real product and service. That's what money is. It's like a claim check. In and of itself, no value, but a claim. And that's why it works, because it's based ultimately on trust. We've had plenty of governments dictate money in the past, plenty of governments still trying to manipulate money, but it's based on trust. So it's like a claim check. The other thing to keep in mind is money measures value instantly. So if I go to the marketplace with a dozen eggs, I don't have to, and I want a cheeseburger, I don't have to hope somebody wants eggs for a cheeseburger to get the transaction done, what economists call coincidence of needs. You just do it through money, the medium of money. So money measures value the way scales measure weight, rulers measure space, and clocks measure time. And it stands to reason that just as in a marketplace, fixed weights and measures make doing transactions so much easier. You buy a liter of gas, you assume it's the same size today as it was yesterday, be the same size tomorrow. It doesn't float or fluctuate. It's fixed. This country, Switzerland, understands this in a way just about no other country in the world does today. The Swiss franc, for the last 100 years, has been the world economy's most stable currency. So little Switzerland, 3 different languages, that doesn't sound very efficient. Cantons that go their own way, no central government, who needs that? Little country, 90th terms of population in the world, yet a global powerhouse. One of the essences is stable money. Because when you have unstable money, it undermines that essential thing, social trust. It makes investment less likely, because investing is risky enough. You may think you've scoped it all out, but you don't know. But if you don't know what you're going to get back when you take this risk of making an investment, you get less of it. Thing to remember about prices. Prices in a marketplace convey what you might call priceless information. So you have instant values. You can make transactions, as I mentioned, billions of times a day. But when you have unstable money, it's like a virus in a computer. It corrupts the information. Back in the 1970s, when the US, for a variety of reasons, undermined the value and integrity of the dollar, oil went from $3 a barrel to almost $40 a barrel. Now, normally, a price surge like that would signal there must be running out of the stuff. It must be becoming rarer. But no, it wasn't that oil was becoming more valuable, it was the dollar was becoming less valuable, weak. You saw this in other commodities. Now, in the early 80s, when we finally conquered the terrible inflation of the 70s, what happened to oil? Crashed from almost $40 a barrel down to 10, finally stabilized at $20, $25 a barrel. Then in the early 2000s, we did the same thing again. The US undermined in a slower motion way the integrity of the dollar. So suddenly oil goes from $20, $25 a barrel to over $100 a barrel. Once again, we got the stories. We must be running out of the stuff, peak oil and all that kind of stuff. Other commodities soared up. Oh, we're running out of this stuff. When you have that kind of instability, investment flows are distorted. They go into hard assets. When anyone ever asks me, should I invest in gold or silver, I know we have a problem. That's not a factory. That's not a new way of doing things. It's just buying an asset that's already there. That's not an investment. It's not how you move forward. It doesn't create new knowledge. But that's what happens when you undermine the integrity of a currency. Thankfully, as I mentioned, the Swiss knew that. So just imagine for a moment, if, and by the way, in terms of oil, Then in 2012, our central bank, the Federal Reserve, which didn't know what it was doing, inadvertently made the dollar more valuable. What happened to oil? Crashed down to $30, $35 a barrel. Other commodities crashed. Farm Belt in the US went into crisis. Prices were not giving the right information. Now just play a mind game. Imagine if my central bank in America, the Federal Reserve, took over the Time Bureau and decided to float the clock. 60 minutes an hour one day, 48 minutes the next, 96 minutes the day after. You know, life would be more chaotic. You couldn't trust the time. Imagine if the definition of words changed each day. They change over time. Imagine if each day, language couldn't operate without it. Now imagine baking a cake with the Fed in charge of the Time Bureau. It says, bake the batter 30 minutes. You're going to have to ask yourself, are those nominal minutes? Are those inflation-adjusted minutes? Are they Swiss minutes, Mexican minutes, US minutes? You can see it. Yet somehow, when it comes to money, that understanding of fixed weights and measures goes out the window. Now, I'm not going to bore you by discussing things like the gold standard. The reason people still like gold after 4,000 years, imperfect though it is, it still keeps its intrinsic value better than anything else, better than silver, better than anything else. Not perfect, but better than anything else. And it doesn't restrict money supplies any more than a fixed meter restricts the size of the length of a road or the size of a building. It's just a measurement, a ruler. If you understand about a ruler, it is, you're way ahead of most central bankers. Are there any here? Too bad. I'll apologize to you later if you buy me a drink. But the thing to keep in mind, go back in history. I know sometimes that's not a correct thing to do, but there have really been three phases of money that has profoundly changed the way we live. About 2,500 years ago, in a state near the Greek states, they invented the first known coin. There have been all kinds of money. First, they called it the electrum. And then Athens took it up. Having a coin instead of barter, or these monies that could quickly disappear, weren't recognized as money elsewhere. Because the electrum combined gold and silver, you could use it anywhere. You could use it anywhere. And suddenly, within a short period of time, given the scope of history, Athens became a cultural powerhouse. You look at the creation of markets that had never existed before because of money. And people could devote time to doing other things because they became more and more specialized. It wasn't that the Greeks were inherently better than anyone else, but the medium of money. More than Sparta didn't use it, Athens did it more than anyone else and set the basis, many historians say, for the philosophy and the literature that created Western civilization. Rome was the first coin-based empire. It showed how it could rise up. Yes, it was conquest, but it had that added element. It also could show what happens when you misuse the coin, i.e. debase it, destroy it. You look at the decline of Rome, just look at the decline of their currency. So coins, huge, big first step. Then came paper money. Yes, you had it in China, but it quickly came and quickly went. It really started to take hold inadvertently. So many of these inventions coming out of the marketplace weren't planned. Paper money came out of the Italian banks in northern Italy. Amazing sophistication they had using these pieces of paper. Reorganized the whole clothing industry in Western Europe. Amazing. But the ones who used it the most were after that were the Dutch. Now look at Holland. In and of itself, on paper, it should have been a nothing. It was literally underwater. And it was part of the Spanish Empire. Yet they fought their independence from the Spanish Empire, became the financial capital of the world, created a global empire because they had paper money. They knew how to manage it. And they used that management to create, out of seemingly nothing, a global empire. Then the ones who took it the next step were the Brits. Isaac Newton put the pound on the gold standard. At the time, early 1700s, Britain was a second-tier nation, had a lot going for it, but still wasn't in the big leagues. even with the US breaking away with independence. In a fairly short period of time span, Britain, an island, bested France, even though France was 4 to 5 times the size of Britain in terms of population. On paper, a seemingly richer country because Britain had financial institutions where you could create capital and borrow money at low cost, unlike the French government. It bested France. Now, the next big phase, and of course the US took it up with Alexander Hamilton, another subject for another time, but the next big thing is the obvious one now, is electronic money. First with credit cards, which I mentioned. Then we have this thing called cryptocurrencies. Right now, that is not money. Bitcoin is not money because it's unstable in value. Until these creators figure out a way to make it stable in value, it's going to be a speculative vehicle. One day you can get a steak, the next day you have to buy dog food. It's not useful as a money. You'd never, ever do a long-term contract more than 2 hours denominated in Bitcoin. Let's say 5 years ago in my country, you took out a mortgage, say $250,000, but you did it in Bitcoin. Guess what? You'd owe the bank today $18 million. Not going to work. You pay your workers in Bitcoin. Great, they get a huge raise. You go broke. Can't afford to pay them anymore. So they got to find a way, to stabilize it. Eventually they will. And with the advances that blockchain's going to do in terms of security, in terms of what it's going to be able to do in terms of privacy, which will make it a very desirable thing in terms of security, what you're going to have is the rise of cryptocurrencies. And what that's going to do is allow specialization in ways that we can't even imagine today, which is going to create jobs that we can't even imagine. You know, sometimes because we can't see the future, there's a dearth of imagination. I mean, all these new occupations rise up. I mean, if you'd said 18 years ago, I'm an app writer, you get a very strange look. You write applications for people? What do you mean, app writer? Or, not to be too frivolous, there are now a lot of high-paying jobs in the US coaching video games. 6-figure salaries. Who would have thought of it? Or DJs, disc jockeys, once on radio. If you somehow can take existing music and come up with some of your own and do it in a way that people like, in Las Vegas, they'll pay you 7 figures. Some of these people, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million to do these late night clubs in Las Vegas. Who would have thought of it? Becoming a music center. Nashville, Austin, other places, yeah. Las Vegas, crazy. But these things happen. We also have to overcome social stigmas. In my country, hundreds of thousands of high-skilled jobs go by the wayside. There's a shortage of truckers. Who wants to be a trucker? In fact, they pay $80,000, $100,000 a year. Seems to escape some people. But these things will be dealt with over time. So, but the thing to keep about money is if you stabilize it in value, there are various ways to do it, you can have real progress forward. You will get that knowledge, you will get that experimentation. No country ever achieves economic greatness, like Switzerland has and a handful of others have, with an unstable currency. We have one of the finalists was from Brazil. One of the things that country's repeatedly done is undermine the value of its currency. If it did what Switzerland did, if it did what Isaac Newton did with the Brits, Brazil would finally realize its promise as a global powerhouse. Because you get investment, you create local capital. So, and then talk about digital currencies. You know the country that proportionally is the most advanced in digital currencies? Kenya. Kenya, who would have thought it? But they have money called M-Pesa with handhelds, even if you don't have a bank account. You know, branch banking, not very much of it in Kenya. But with handhelds, you can pay bills, you can make deposits, invest, get paid with a handheld. So that's virtually replaced, it's a virtual banking system. We've become one of the most underbanked countries in the world, but if you take M-Pesa and the handhelds, one of the most banked in the world. So, thing to keep in mind, especially young people, is if you get these basics right, the future will be a good one. And you learn as you go. Many of you are in your early 20s. You'll be different when you're in your early 40s. You'll be different in your early 60s. Maybe in your early hundreds, thanks to technology. You can look forward to that. But you learn as you go. Let me give you an extreme example, Steve Jobs. If you took Steve Jobs and his personality and took away the name and gave it to anybody in human relations or human resources, they would gag. They'd throw up, say, get this guy out of here. He was nasty, couldn't work with people, stole other people's ideas, continuously putting down, manipulative. That's why the guy got fired from his own company at the age of, before his age of 30. But he learned painfully. Yeah, he had a number of years in the wilderness, tried some things, some worked, some didn't, but he learned painfully how to become an effective leader. Learned painfully how you bring talented people together and get them to work together. It wasn't natural. That's the thing to keep in mind. It wasn't natural. It was learned from experience. So allow experience to teach you. Another thing is, try to see things that others don't. Let me quickly give you some examples before we close this. If there are any nutritionists here, I apologize. But take Ray Kroc of McDonald's. Back in the 1950s, he was a guy in his 50s, never had really hit a home run. He was selling milkshake machines in California. Never really made it big. Then he came across the McDonald brothers, had a few stands, and saw what the McDonald brothers fully did not realize. And that is, as you know, any of you who work in the restaurant business know it's the toughest business. The inventory's always going bad on toughest business. Very high casualty rate. They come and they go. But he realized that by having a simplified menu, what these people had done, you could do a national chain, which was conceived impossible. Then an international chain. He saw what the inventors did not. Keep that in mind, what the inventors did not. Mentioned Steve Jobs again. He visited this research at Xerox, Menlo Park in the late 70s, saw what we called the mouse, revolutionized the PC. But they didn't see it. He did. Zuckerberg saw Facebook in a way that Harvard twins did not. You take somebody like Ruth Handler. She was of Mattel. She saw a little doll when visiting Europe called Built Lily. If you know about Built Lily, this was a racy doll, X-rated doll, made by Built, newspaper chain. It was sort of a gag for adults. You would not show it to children. But she realized that at the time, dolls were always babies. But she noticed that her daughter and her friends loved to get these books where you could cut out adult figures, women figures. She figured, why not have a doll that was an adult? Seemingly simple thing. No one had ever thought of it before. And it took a lot of work to turn Built Lily into Barbie. Billions sold. If you don't like Barbie, fine, but she saw something others did not. Another thing to keep in mind is not everything we bring to market is perfect. Henry Ford in the early 1900s already going broke twice. His partner, a fellow named James Couzens, Henry says this new Model A, this is the first Model A, not the second one. First Model A, it's not right, we got to start all over. And Couzens said, if you go bankrupt again, if you start again, it's over. No one's going to give you a dime. You got to put it out there, and we're just going to have to go out and try to make it work as best as possible. So it's not always perfect. Another thing to keep in mind is pairs. You're not going to know it all yourself. Some of the great things, I mentioned Google, Brin and Page, Microsoft, Gates and Allen, Jobs and Steve Wozniak at Apple, Ford and Couzens. Nobody knows Couzens today, but that he was essential. He was bought out eventually by Henry Ford, made one of the greatest industrial companies in the world. What an unlikely pair. Henry Ford was such an incompetent executive, he couldn't run a grocery store. He'd run into the ground within a week. Couzens was all thumbs when it came to making things, couldn't do anything that was made. Yet together, they created what was then the mightiest industrial company in the world. Unlikely pair, unlikely talents. Now, one of the good things is that's going to change the way companies run is right now you retire, you're out. What you're going to see more and more of in the future is you may want to change your work habits. You're 60, you're 70, you want out, but you're not going to leave, you may not even leave the company. You're just going to take a different kind of job, maybe work 3 days a week. This kind of flexibility you're going to see more and more of. And finally, in conclusion, in terms of one of the challenges today, trade, word about tariffs is this. Tariffs are sales taxes. Tariffs are VATs. Tariffs are excise taxes. They stand in the way of progress. We should be reducing trade barriers, not putting them on. Not putting them on. And all you have to do is look at 1929, 1930, when the US put on a glob of new tariffs, started a global trade war, started the Depression. We all saw where that went. We need more human progress, more human interaction, not less. Thank you all very much.